1848. A 20-year-old merchant in West Africa gets news that his mother has been captured in a slave raid. Most sons would panic, maybe try to raise ransom money. According to oral tradition preserved among the Mandinka people, Samori Ture walked into the captor's camp and made an offer. "Take me instead. Let me serve in your army and free my mother." The deal was accepted. Historical accounts suggest Samurai served for several years learning warfare, mastering firearms, and studying military strategy. When he finally left, he didn't just free his mother. He took everything he'd learned and built an empire that would fight the French for 16 years. Samori Ture was born around 1830 in Manyambaladugu, in what's now Guinea. His father was a diola weaver and merchant. As a boy, Samurai was what you'd call a problem child. He led a gang of local boys who would raid farms and steal fruit. His father, frustrated with his behavior, sent him away to learn the family trade, buying and selling cola nuts and cloth. By his late teens, Samurai had become skilled at negotiation and trade. He understood how to read people, how to strike deals, how to move goods across difficult terrain. Then, in 1848, everything changed. His mother, Sokona Kamara, was captured during a raid by Sere Burle of the Sise clan. Samurai made his choice. He walked into Sere Burle's territory and offered himself in exchange for his mother's freedom. The offer was accepted, and Samurai joined the Sise military forces. For 7 years he served. He learned how to handle firearms. He studied tactics. He watched how commanders organized troops and managed campaigns. When he finally left the Sise clan with his mother, Samori Ture was no longer a fruit-stealing troublemaker. He was a trained warrior with a vision. Through the 1860s and 1870s, Samori Ture began building what would become the Wassoulou Empire. His methods combined force and diplomacy. He would approach village leaders with a simple proposition: join my confederation voluntarily or face military pressure. Many chose to join. Those who resisted found themselves facing a commander who had spent years perfecting his craft. By 1878, he had unified enough territory to declare himself Almamy, a Muslim religious and political leader. But Samurai wasn't just claiming titles, he was building systems. He organized a professional standing army with strict discipline. His close family members and most trusted allies became commanders. He divided his forces into units with clear chains of command. The Wassoulou Empire at its height stretched across parts of modern-day Guinea, Sierra Leone, Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, and Burkina Faso. This wasn't a loose collection of villages. This was an organized state with military infrastructure, trade networks, and centralized authority. But Samurai understood something crucial. His empire sat directly in the path of French colonial expansion, and the French were moving east from Senegal, absorbing territory as they went. The collision was inevitable. 1883. French forces occupied Bamako on the Niger River. Samori Ture recognized this for what it was, the beginning of French attempts to control the region. He began his resistance immediately. The French had expected another relatively easy colonial campaign. What they got instead was something they hadn't encountered before: an organized African state with modern weapons and commanders who understood both traditional African warfare and European military tactics. Samurai's forces used guerrilla warfare. They would ambush French patrols, strike supply lines, then fade back into terrain they knew intimately. They constructed fortified villages that served as defensive positions and supply bases. When direct confrontation was disadvantageous, Samurai's troops simply moved. They were mobile in ways the French, with their heavy equipment and supply trains, couldn't match. After a successful French offensive in 1886, Samurai agreed to a treaty that made the Niger River his northern frontier. But this wasn't surrender. It was a strategic pause while he reorganized and rearmed. By the early 1890s, French pressure was increasing. They wanted complete control of the region, and Samurai's empire stood in their way. Samurai made a decision that would define the next phase of his resistance. If the French wanted his territory, they would get nothing but ashes. He implemented a scorched earth policy. As his forces retreated, they destroyed everything: crops, villages, anything that could supply or shelter French troops. The French found themselves chasing an enemy through devastated land where they couldn't forage or requisition supplies. At a council meeting in Franconedo on May 9, 1892, Samori and his allies made a strategic choice: move the entire empire east. They would rebuild in Kabadougou in the eastern regions and establish a second empire. Think about what this means. Samori Ture was essentially relocating an entire state, government, military, population, to avoid French control while maintaining the capacity to resist. The migration was brutal. His forces used scorched earth the entire way, denying the pursuing French any resources. But it worked. By 1892, Samori had established his new capital in Kong, in Upper Côte d'Ivoire.
Samori Ture, still at large.
The French were frustrated. They had been fighting this war for nearly a decade, and Samori Ture was still free, still organized, still capable of military action. What made Samori's resistance so effective wasn't just determination, it was innovation. He organized his troops into disciplined units with coordinated firepower. He captured European weapons whenever possible and trained his forces to use them effectively. Historical accounts mention he even used small cannons in unconventional ways, mounting them on animals to create mobile firing positions during raids. His intelligence network was sophisticated. He used decoys and misinformation to mislead French forces about his troop movements. French columns would pursue what they thought was Samori's main forces, only to find they'd been chasing a diversion while the real attack came from another direction. He formed alliances with neighboring leaders, creating a coalition that shared intelligence and resources. This made French campaigns far more complex than simple military operations. But perhaps his most effective tactic was attrition. Samori understood he didn't need to win major battles. He needed to make French occupation so expensive and difficult that they would question whether controlling the region was worth the cost. For over a decade, he succeeded. By the late 1890s, Samori Ture was fighting on multiple fronts. The French had committed substantial resources to ending his resistance. More columns, better supplies, increasing pressure from all directions. In 1895, his forces took Kong. In 1898, they moved into Bonduku, but the French were closing in. The scorched earth strategy that had served him for years had also cut him off from new sources of weapons and supplies. His alliance with British-controlled territories in Liberia, which had provided arms, was no longer accessible. On September 29, 1898, French troops caught up with Samori Ture on the upper reaches of the Cavally River. After 16 years of resistance, after relocating an entire empire, after countless campaigns and battles, he was captured. The French transported him into exile. He was taken to Gabon, far from his homeland. In June 1900, Samori Ture died in captivity from pneumonia. He was approximately 70 years old. The French celebrated Samori's capture as the end of major resistance in the region. They thought removing him would mean the end of his empire's influence. They badly underestimated what he had created. Samori Ture had proven that African states could organize modern military resistance, could adapt to European tactics, could make colonial conquest expensive and difficult. His 16-year campaign became a template that other resistance movements would study. His legacy lived on through his descendants. His great-grandson, Ahmed Sékou Touré, became the first president of independent Guinea in 1958. The connection wasn't just genealogical. Sékou Touré explicitly drew on his great-grandfather's resistance as inspiration for Guinea's independence movement. Today, Samori Ture is remembered across West Africa as a symbol of resistance to colonialism. His story appears in school curricula from Guinea to Côte d'Ivoire. Streets and institutions carry his name, but perhaps more importantly, his tactics and strategies influenced how later generations thought about resistance. The idea that you could relocate, reorganize, and continue fighting, that you could make occupation too expensive to sustain, these concepts became part of the anti-colonial toolkit across Africa. Samori Ture's story challenges several assumptions about colonial-era Africa. First, that African resistance was disorganized or primitive. Samurai built a professional military with modern weapons, organized logistics, and sophisticated tactics. Second, that European technological advantage made resistance futile. For 16 years, samurai proved that local knowledge, strategic thinking, and willingness to adapt could frustrate European military campaigns. Third, that African political organization was limited to tribal structures. The Wassoulou Empire was a multi-ethnic state with centralized administration and complex governance. His choice to exchange himself for his mother's freedom also speaks to something deeper, the value systems that drove his later leadership. He understood loyalty, sacrifice, and the importance of protecting those under his care. When he later built an empire, those same values shaped how he led. His commanders were family and close allies, people he trusted completely. His strategic decisions, like the scorched earth policy, were brutal but aimed at preserving his people's independence. From fruit thief to merchant to warrior to empire builder to symbol of resistance, Samori Ture's life spanned the transformation of West Africa. He proved that determination, strategic thinking, and willingness to adapt could challenge even the most powerful colonial forces. He showed that African leaders could build states, organize armies, and resist European expansion for years. The French eventually captured him, but they never broke what he built. The idea that African peoples could organize, resist, and fight for their independence. That idea lived on through his descendants, through the independence movements of the 20th century, and through every African leader who refused to accept foreign domination. Samori Ture started as a boy, stealing fruit. He ended as a symbol of African resistance that still resonates today. If this story of West African resistance inspired you, subscribe and let me know in the comments. What other African resistance leaders should we explore? Thanks for watching.